Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. You know, have you ever stopped to think about those moments in history, those conflicts that are incredibly short, maybe just days, but end up casting these unbelievably long shadows?
Yeah, it's fascinating how brief events can have such lasting impacts.
Exactly. And today we're really diving deep into one of the most, well, iconic and definitely consequential conflicts of the modern era, the Six-Day War. I mean, its speed was just astonishing and its impact, well, it fundamentally reshaped the Middle East.
Oh, yeah.
Understanding it is absolutely crucial if you want to get a handle on the region today. So we've gone through all your sources, articles, research papers, notes, the whole lot, and our mission here is to really unpack how this incredibly swift, really devastating confrontation happened, and maybe more importantly, why we still feel its effects so strongly today. We want to pull out the key insights, give you that shortcut to being properly informed.
It really is an extraordinary case study. And the core question, I think, is how? How did a war lasting just 6 days manage to completely redraw the map, shift the power balance so dramatically in such a, well, let's face it, volatile part of the world?
Right.
What's really interesting, and what the sources highlight, is how all these different factors sort of collided. It wasn't just one thing. It feels like, in retrospect, it was almost inevitable,
Yeah.
as some sources put it. It wasn't spontaneous. It built up over years. Tensions, miscalculations, strategic moves.
Absolutely. It was a culmination. So our journey today starts with that prelude, that really tense build-up to war. Then we'll dive into that incredible opening strike, Operation Focus. After that, the ground war, three fronts, incredibly fast. And finally, we'll look at the consequences, the dramatic, long-lasting consequences. It's a lot to cover, but essential stuff. Okay, let's unpack this.
The boiling cauldron, the road to war.
So to really get the Six-Day War, you have to go back further than 67, right? The roots are really in the outcomes of the 1948 war, Israel's establishment, and then the 56 Suez Crisis.
Definitely. From the perspective of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, the Arab coalition, 1948 was, the Nakba, the catastrophe. And 56, while maybe a political win for Nasser in some ways, didn't settle anything on the ground.
No, not at all. And our sources make it really clear. The Arab side was, quote, eager to change the situation. They saw Israel's earlier victories as, well, temporary, reversible, not the final word.
Both sides knew it. They understood, as one source says, the conflict was far from over. There were constant border skirmishes, small fights blowing up. Diplomacy wasn't really going anywhere.
So everyone was preparing, actively getting ready for the next round.
Pretty much, yeah. It wasn't peace. It was more like a really unstable ceasefire, an armed truce where any little incident could just ignite everything.
And external factors played a big role too, didn't they? Outside powers, misinformation.
Hugely. International attempts to mediate often got tangled up, sometimes even made things worse unintentionally. But the real flashpoint, the critical moment, according to our sources, came on May 13th, 1967.
Ah, the Soviet intelligence report.
Exactly. The Soviet Union told Egypt falsely. It turned out that Israel was massing 11 to 13 brigades on the Syrian border, ready to attack.
Wow. False intelligence. How did that specific piece of info just light the fuse so quickly?
Well, it played right into existing fears, didn't it?
Yeah.
It pushed Nasser towards immediate drastic action.
Yeah.
It started this cascade, this chain reaction that just seemed impossible to stop.
And Egypt reacted instantly.
Instantly. Nasser took that report wrong, as it was at face value. First big move. Send huge numbers of Egyptian troops into the Sinai right up to the border with Israel.
Yeah.
Then, just 3 days later, May 16th, he escalates again. Demands the UN peacekeeping force, UNEF the buffer there since 56, get out of Sinai. Completely.
And crucially, Israel refused the UN request to put peacekeepers on their side of the border too.
Right. So, removing that buffer, UNEF leaving, that was a massive signal. Clear sign things were heading towards war. And then mobilization just exploded across the region.
Everyone started calling up troops.
Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Sudan, reservists called up, units moving to the front. Iraq sent troops to Jordan. Saudi Arabia said they were ready to jump in. The whole place was just a powder keg, basically. Everyone was showing their weapons.
So tensions are sky high, troops are massing. But what was the absolute point of no return? The thing that made war unavoidable, especially for Israel?
That would have to be May 22nd and 23rd. Egypt's decision to blockade the Straits of Tiran, blocking Israeli ships.
Explain why that was such a big deal, the Straits of Tiran.
It's Israel's only sea access from their southern port, Eilat, to the Red Sea and beyond. So blocking it wasn't just symbolic, it was a direct hit to their economy, their shipping, their access to Asia and Africa.
A stranglehold, essentially.
For Israel, yes, they saw it as a casus belli, an act of war, an existential threat, really. There wasn't much diplomatic room left after that. From their perspective, military action seemed like the only way out.
Okay, so the blockade happens. Israel sees war as inevitable now. What happens next politically in Israel?
Things moved fast. The gravity of the situation hit home. On June 1st, they formed a national unity government. This was huge, bringing in different political factions. Menachem began, Moshe Dayan became defense minister. It showed this unified front against the perceived threat.
A sign of national emergency.
Absolutely. It reflected the mood. And then, after some intense debate within that new government, by June 4th, the decision was made. They would launch a preemptive strike. Diplomacy seemed dead, and military action felt urgent, necessary for survival as they saw it.
Before we get into the strike itself, maybe we should just pause on the numbers. The military balance right before the fighting started, because on paper it looked pretty bad for Israel, didn't it?
It looked daunting, yeah. The combined Arab forces, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, had a big quantitative edge. Something like 240,000 troops against Israel's 100,000 regulars, though Israel could mobilize reservists very quickly.
And tanks, aircraft.
Tanks, maybe 2,500 for the Arab coalition versus around 800 for Israel. And aircraft, the difference was even starker. Around 950 planes versus maybe 300 Israeli ones.
So, looking at those numbers, Israel's success seems, well, almost impossible.
Exactly. It really sets the stage. It highlights how things like better training, better tactics, maybe better intelligence could completely overturn that numerical advantage. It forces you to ask, how on earth did they pull it off?
The decisive first strike operation focus.
Right. That huge disadvantage really underscores the sheer audacity of Israel's plan. They knew they couldn't win a prolonged war of attrition. So the strategy was strike first, strike hard.
Precisely. A preemptive knockout blow. Their plan, codenamed Operation Focus, was all about destroying the Egyptian Air Force, their biggest threat, on the ground right at the start, June 5th. Take out their planes before they could even take off.
A massive gamble.
If it failed.
Catastrophe.
Yeah.
Israel would be exposed to devastating air attacks, their ground forces incredibly vulnerable, but the planning, the deception involved, that's where it gets really fascinating.
Tell us about that deception. How did they hide what they were planning? It was quite brilliant, really. They used multiple layers. For instance, the Israeli media put out fake stories, soldiers supposedly on leave, relaxing. Meanwhile, their pilots were flying intense sorties, but publicly described as just training as usual.
Misdirection.
Total misdirection. And intelligence played a key role in making that training incredibly realistic. Pilots practiced hitting mock-ups of Egyptian airfields, knew their exact targets, flight paths, timings, down to the second.
Wow.
There's even this almost unbelievable detail. They apparently damaged the tracking antenna at the U.S. Embassy just before the strike. Why? To stop the Americans from detecting the launch and possibly tipping off the Egyptians.
Incredible. And the pilots themselves, when did they know?
The secrecy was intense. The pilots were only told about the actual mission just 5 hours in advance. Talk about pressure.
And the Egyptians, what was their state of alert?
This is perhaps the most critical piece, likely down to superb Israeli intelligence. On that morning, June 5th, Egypt's air defense system was found to be effectively off. Apparently, Egyptian commanders had ordered a stand down. They likely believed those reports about Israeli troops being on leave, maybe thought the immediate threat had passed. They were caught completely by surprise, utterly vulnerable.
And the attack itself, Operation Focus, begins.
Devastatingly effective. It started around 7:45 a.m. Israeli time Almost 200 Israeli jets flying super low to avoid radar hit 14 Egyptian airfields simultaneously across Sinai and even deeper into Egypt.
Catching them completely off guard.
Absolutely. Planes parked neatly on the tarmac, pilots in their barracks. The Israelis hit the runways first, cratering them so planes couldn't take off, then systematically destroyed the aircraft themselves. The coordination, the scale, it was unprecedented.
The results must have been immediate.
Staggering. Within just 3 hours, Israel claims something like 338 Egyptian aircraft destroyed. Huge numbers. And tragically, around 100 Egyptian pilots were killed in that initial onslaught, plus ground crew.
So in 3 hours, they essentially crippled the entire Egyptian Air Force.
Pretty much decapitated it. Shattered command and control, induced massive psychological shock. There was no way for Egypt to recover quickly from that kind of blow.
Now, as news of this starts to spread, although probably distorted news at first.
Right. Nasser was initially claiming huge victories over the radio, which tragically misled his allies.
So Jordan and Syria, hearing these false reports, they decide to jump in.
Exactly. Around 11 a.m. on June 5th, Jordanian and Syrian planes attacked Israeli targets, thinking they were joining a successful offensive.
How did Israel handle that? They're still engaged with Egypt.
Their response was incredibly swift. The Israeli Air Force just redirected planes returning from Egypt, rearmed them, and immediately hit Jordanian and Syrian airfields.
Same result.
Same devastating result. Within hours, basically all of Jordan's small Air Force 28 planes were gone. Syria lost 53 planes. Even 10 Iraqi planes that had moved to Jordanian bases were destroyed.
So Israel now has total air dominance across all fronts.
Complete dominance. Operation Focus was undeniably a decisive success. Israel lost only 19 planes in the whole operation, an incredibly low number given the scale.
And what did that mean for the rest of the war?
It meant everything for the ground war. Israel's ground troops could now advance knowing they had total control of the skies. They had air cover, reconnaissance, close air support, while Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian forces were exposed, vulnerable, with no air support of their own. That initial air victory was absolutely fundamental.
The ground war, a three-front blitz.
Okay, so the air war is effectively won on day one. The focus shifts immediately to the ground, and it happens fast, simultaneously, really. A blitz across three main fronts: Sinai against Egypt, the West Bank and Jerusalem against Jordan, and the Golan Heights against Syria.
Each with its own challenges, I imagine.
Absolutely different terrain, different enemy strengths, different strategic objectives. The Sinai front against Egypt.
Let's start with Sinai. That was the biggest front, right? The main effort.
By far. Egypt had huge forces deployed there. 7 divisions, maybe 100,000 troops, close to 950 tanks. They were dug in, expecting an attack.
And Israel's force.
Israel concentrated 3 divisions there, maybe 70,000 men, 700 tanks. Still outnumbered, but the ratio was much closer than the overall numbers suggested. They knew Sinai was key.
And their plan. How did they approach it on the ground?
They used that air superiority immediately. Ground attacks launched pretty much at the same time as the airstrikes began. The key tactical surprise, though, was the route.
How so?
In the 1956 war, Israel had attacked mainly through the center and south of Sinai. This time, they focused on the northern and central routes. They wanted to hit where the Egyptians might not expect it as strongly, bypass some defenses, create confusion.
Clever. Did it work?
It seemed to. On June 5th, early morning, 7:50 a.m., General Talal's Northern Division pushed towards Arish, aiming to cut off Gaza. Paratroopers dropped near Rafah.
And the Egyptians thought it was a diversion.
Initially, yes. That crucial misjudgment gave the Israelis a head start. They faced resistance, sure, especially as they pushed towards Khan Yunis, but they reached the railway junction there in just 4 hours. Pretty incredible speed.
4 hours.
Then they pushed on towards Arish. Sources talk about fierce Egyptian resistance near Shia Zawied, but Israeli air power was decisive, clearing the way. By the next morning, June 6th, they entered Arish itself.
Was it easy going into the city?
No, apparently it was suspiciously quiet at first, then erupted into really heavy street fighting. Egyptians firing from buildings. It took reinforcements and tough urban combat to secure Arish fully. Then Tal's division split. Some pushed west towards the Suez Canal. others south to secure the central Sinai crossroads.
Okay, that's the northern push. What about the center? That was Ariel Sharon's division, right?
That's right, Major General Sharon's 38th Armored Division. Around 14,000 men, 150 tanks. They went up against the Egyptian 2nd Infantry Division near the critical Abu Agala crossroads.
Yeah.
Maybe 16,000 Egyptians, 90 tanks dug in
A
there.
major defensive position.
Absolutely key. And Israel used a really smart tactic here on June 6th. They landed paratroopers behind the Egyptian lines, specifically targeting their artillery positions.
Disrupt their fire support.
Exactly. It caused enough chaos, sowed enough confusion, as one source puts it, to weaken the Egyptian defense. This allowed the Israeli armor to break through and capture Unkatef, a major stronghold.
Was there a big tank battle?
Oh, yes. A fierce, close tank battle followed. Brutal stuff. Israel came out on top, but both sides lost tanks, maybe 40 Egyptian, 19 Israeli. But the victory secured that central route for Israel.
So Israel's making significant gains in the north and center. How did the Egyptian command react to this? Their forces weren't totally destroyed yet, were they?
No, remarkably, sources say their forces were still largely intact in many areas. But the commander, Field Marshal Amr in Cairo, hearing about Abu Agala falling, seems to have, well, the sources say he panicked. That's the word used. Under the pressure of the Israeli advances and the constant air attacks, he issued a general order. All Egyptian units retreat from Sinai, pull back across the Suez Canal.
Wow. A general retreat order. Was it orderly?
That's the tragic part. Apparently, the order did not elaborate on the sequence and manner of the retreat. It was just get out, which created absolute chaos.
So it turned into a rout.
Pretty much. It just destroyed their remaining defensive capability. The IDF kept pushing west, hitting the retreating columns hard. There were pockets of really fierce resistance, Egyptians fighting bravely against orders like at Bir Gifgafa, but overall,
Yeah, the Israeli Air Force was still active.
relentlessly. Sources mention napalm bombing on the retreating columns, adding to the chaos and shattering morale. It was an uncontrolled retreat under constant air attack. Truly horrific.
Did the Israelis just chase them all the way to the canal?
They made a strategic choice. Instead of just pursuing, they focused on capturing the main passes leading out of Sinai towards Egypt. The Gidi and Mitla passes especially.
Why the passes?
To trap them. These narrow passes became bottlenecks, absolute killing grounds. One source chillingly states 10,000 Egyptians being killed in one day alone trying to get through those passes under Israeli fire.
Devastating. So when was Sinai fully captured?
Sharm el-Sheikh, down at the southern tip guarding the Straits of Tiran, fell on June 7th. Ras Sudar on the western coast on June 8th. By June 9th, a UN ceasefire was agreed on that front. The whole peninsula, hundreds of kilometers, taken in basically 4 days of fighting. Just astounding speed. The Jordanian front for Jerusalem and the West Bank.
Okay, let's shift now to the Jordanian front. Jerusalem, the West Bank. This was different, right? Israel initially didn't want to fight Jordan.
That's right. Their main focus was Egypt. They wanted to avoid a two-front war impossible. Sources even say they sent a message to King Hussein of Jordan via the UN, basically saying, stay out of it and we won't attack you. A last gasp attempt to keep Jordan neutral.
But Hussein didn't stay out. Why?
Tragically, he seems to have believed Nasser's false radio broadcasts claiming massive Egyptian victories against Israel. The sources say he was persuaded by these claims and told the UN intermediary, essentially, it was too late.
So that misinformation from Nasser directly pulled Jordan into the war, based on completely false pretenses.
It really seems that way, a fatal miscalculation fueled by propaganda. It's a stark reminder of how misinformation can have deadly consequences in conflict.
So what happened on the morning of June 5th on that front?
Both sides started firing pretty quickly. Jordanian artillery and some Iraqi planes based in Jordan began shelling Israeli West Jerusalem. There were casualties, military and civilian, and significant damage to buildings Jordan was in.
And Israel's response in the air.
Swished and decisive, just like against Egypt. Part of Operation Focus targeted Jordanian airfields. Jordan's small air force was effectively neutralized on day one, giving Israel air dominance here too. Again, that air power proving crucial on all fronts. The fight for Jerusalem itself was obviously hugely significant, not just militarily, but emotionally, symbolically.
East Jerusalem, including the Old City, was under Jordanian control then.
Right. And the Jordanian army, the Arab Legion, was a tough professional force. They took up positions, including in the UN headquarters building Government House, which gave them a great vantage point to fire into West Jerusalem.
So Israel had to take that.
Yes,
Okay.
an Israeli reserve battalion took Government House, but with heavy losses. The Jordanians fell back towards Bethlehem. Then, later on June 5th, Israel moved to encircle East Jerusalem troops coming from the south and mechanized units plus paratroopers from the north.
Setting the stage for the battle within the city. I read about Ammunition Hill that was particularly brutal.
Extremely. A key fortified Jordanian position defending the northern approach. The sources describe a fierce battle, desperate hand-to-hand fighting in trenches. Jordanian resistance was incredibly strong. The IDF took very heavy casualties, losing almost all their attacking officers. It took them 4 hours of intense combat to finally capture it.
Wow. 4 hours for one hill.
It shows the intensity. After that, the paratroopers pushed on, took Mount Scopus, cleared other Jordanian positions. Meanwhile, other Israeli units took Latrun and Ramallah to the west and Abu Tor to the south, cutting the old city off from Bethlehem and Hebron.
So East Jerusalem is surrounded. What about entering the Old City itself with all the holy sites? Was that controversial?
Very. Sources say the Israeli government had reservations and concerns, worries about international reaction, damage to holy places. But on June 7th, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan gave the order. Go in.
How was the fighting inside the Old City?
Apparently, it was done very carefully, solely by the paratroopers, specifically to try and avoid damaging the holy sites. And perhaps because the surrounding areas were secured, they took the old city with relatively little resistance in the end.
And the rest of the West Bank.
Captured swiftly around the same time. Judea, Hebron, Bethlehem, Nablus, all taken by June 7th. The remaining Jordanian forces retreated back across the Jordan River.
So another decisive Israeli victory on this front, but one with huge historical and political implications, especially the capture of East Jerusalem in the West Bank.
Immense. It fundamentally changed the conflict and set the stage for decades of struggle and negotiation that continue today. C. The Syrian front for the Golan Heights.
Okay, third front, Syria and the Golan Heights. Did Syria also believe Nasser's initial reports?
Yes, seems so. Like Jordan, they thought they were joining a winning fight. They sent some planes to attack northern Israel, Galilee, but the Israeli Air Force intercepted most of them. They also tried a small ground attack to capture some water sources near the border.
How did that go?
It was repulsed by the IDF. Sources suggest several reasons for the Syrian ground attacks failing. Israeli air superiority, again, but also lack of communication by Syrian units, coordination problems, and apparently some of their tanks were literally too wide for bridges they needed to cross.
Logistical problems hampering them.
Seems like it. So they largely gave up on ground attacks early on and stuck to shelling Israeli settlements from the Golan Heights, which they had been doing for years.
But Israel hit their Air Force too, as part of Operation Focus.
Oh, yes. On the evening of June 5th, Israeli planes struck Syrian airfields, destroyed about 2/3 of the Syrian Air Force, knocking them effectively out of the conflict in the air. Same pattern. Air dominance secured first.
So Syria is shelling from the Golan, but their Air Force is gone. Did Israel plan to attack the Golan Heights from the start?
It seems the leadership was initially unsure whether to attack Syria on the ground. On one hand, the shelling from the Golan was a constant menace. On the other hand, attacking the Golan was a daunting prospect, a literally uphill battle against a fortified enemy. Steep slopes, dug-in positions.
A tough military challenge.
Definitely, there was real debate. But then, intelligence came in suggesting Syrian positions might be weaker than assumed. Maybe morale was shaky after the Air Force losses. This apparently led Moshe Dayan to order the offensive on the Golan, interestingly, without government authorization at first.
Really? He just ordered it himself.
That's what the sources suggest. Shows the kind of decisive, perhaps impulsive leadership at play. The offensive began with heavy Israeli airstrikes on the Golan defenses.
Toughening them up first.
Exactly. Damaging infrastructure, hitting morale. Then the ground troops went in, spearheaded by Colonel Mandler's 8th Armored Brigade.
And the fighting was tough, as expected.
Extremely tough, heavy fighting in unfavorable terrain. Lots of casualties on both sides. The Syrians fought hard from their fortifications. But again, Israeli air support was critical, helping the ground forces capture key points like the Zora Color and Einfit fortresses. Other battalions fought fiercely for places like Dardara and Tel Halal.
So slow, hard progress uphill.
Yes, but they made it. By the evening of June 9th, Israeli forces reached the plateau. That was the breakthrough. Reinforcements could then pour up onto the heights. By the next morning, Israel had about 8 brigades ready to take on the remaining Syrian defenses.
But they didn't have to. A ceasefire was called.
That's right. Before a final assault on the second line could really begin, a ceasefire was negotiated. It came into effect by June 11th, establishing the so-called Purple Line as the new de facto border. That brought the fighting on all fronts to an end.
The aftermath, a transformed landscape.
6 days. Just absolutely incredible. So let's look at the immediate aftermath. The human cost, first of all.
It was significant. Israel lost up to 983 soldiers killed, but the Arab losses were far higher. Estimates are around 15,000 Egyptians, 700 Jordanians, and maybe 2,500 Syrians killed. Thousands more wounded or captured. The scale of the defeat, particularly for Egypt, was immense.
And the territorial changes, they were stunning.
Absolutely transformative. Israel captured the Gaza Strip and the entire Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria.
Doubling, tripling its size.
More than tripling the landmass under its control. These territorial gains completely redo the map. And connecting this to the bigger picture, these specific territories became the absolute focal point of the conflict for the next 50-plus years. Occupation, settlements, security, peace negotiations, it all revolved around these lands seized in '67.
And taking that land meant taking control of the people living there, too.
Yes, a huge demographic shift. Suddenly, about 1 million Arabs in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem were living under Israeli military rule. This created enormous, complex challenges, administrative, legal, political, humanitarian, that Israel is still grappling with today.
Looking back, what do the sources say were the key reasons for Israel's incredibly swift and decisive victory, despite being outnumbered initially?
The sources consistently point to a few main factors. More efficient military leadership is one. Israeli commanders showed flexibility, took initiative, exploited opportunities rapidly.
Their training.
Yes, better preparation of troops. Israeli soldiers, pilots, tankers were highly trained, disciplined, and seemed to operate with a high degree of motivation and technical skill. And crucially, intelligence.
We saw that with Operation Focus and knowing the Egyptian air defenses were down.
Exactly. Superior intelligence gathering and analysis gave them a critical edge, allowing for that devastating preemptive strike and informing battlefield decisions. It really raises the question of how much weight to give each factor, doesn't it? Was it the leadership, the training, the intel, or the specific combination?
It seems like that combination proved devastatingly effective against the quantitative advantage of the Arab armies.
It certainly seems that way. Qualitative factors really seem to outweigh quantitative ones in this specific conflict.
And of course, this decisive war, the Six-Day War, it wasn't the end of the story, was it?
Not by a long shot. As the sources note, it was by no means the last conflict. Just 6 years later, in 1973, you have the Yom Kippur War, where Egypt and Syria launched their own surprise attack, seeking to regain the territories lost in '67. The Six-Day War solved nothing permanently. In many ways, it just set the stage for the next round and the one after that. Its legacy is incredibly complex and long-lasting. Outro.
Wow, what an incredible amount of ground we've covered in this deep dive. A war that lasted less than a week, But as you say, its echoes are still shaping the Middle East and indeed the world today.
It really is remarkable.
We've seen that potent mix of detailed planning, bold deception, sheer battlefield ferocity, and also those critical errors, those miscalculations that define the outcome. From that spark of false intelligence to the crushing air superiority and the rapid ground advances, every element played a crucial role.
And maybe a final thought for our listeners to consider, reflecting on all this. Military victory can be incredibly swift, as we saw here, decisive even. But the political consequences, the human consequences, occupation, displacement, enduring grievances, those unfold over generations. They often plant the seeds for new conflicts, new challenges.
That's a powerful point.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do
Yes.
these incredibly rapid, transformative moments in history continue to ripple outwards? How do they keep influencing events, shaping identities, fueling struggles long, long after the fighting stops? It's a reminder that history isn't just about the battles. It's about the long, complex aftermath.
Absolutely. A lot to think about there. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration gave you a clearer picture, maybe some new perspectives on this pivotal war, and perhaps even sparked some new questions for you to explore further.
Hope so.
We'll catch you on the next one.